more copies of the data that need to exist forever and live with other companies that are out of your control, make it very difficult to know if you're compliant. About half of the implementations don't provide any value in the enterprise, and people still spend hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars on them. Marketers are going from using Adobe Analytics, Google Analytics, spreadsheets as their main place of data to using Tableau, Looker, the data warehouse, etc.
Hello everyone, I am Sergio Maldonado and this is Masters of Privacy, a set of interviews covering the intersection of marketing, data, privacy and technology with a clear goal in mind, which is redefining the relationship between people, brands and media around transparency and control. Which is to say, we're aiming for real customer centricity, or if you will, human centricity. We regularly talk to DPOs, CMOs, CDOs, and whoever else we find interesting and able to share valuable insights. So we hope you like it. Please do reach out if you have any ideas on future topics or speakers. Okay, it's been months since the last time we had anyone here from the pure MarTech or marketing technology side, which I find essential to properly understand the impact of many of the things we do, both on the privacy compliance and the marketing strategy or business fronts. As a quick background, we had quite a long episode covering CDPs or customer data platforms, which, as many of you know, aim to provide a single customer view across multiple channels and digital touchpoints, and were born in a world in which such 360-degree view of the customer, as it's called, could be attempted behind the customer's back, I'd say, or without her own understanding that this reconstruction of her decision-making journeys or buying habits was even taking place. Anyhow, we covered the many challenges that this approach faces today in terms of both privacy compliance, including transparency, and signal loss, with Paco Roldan from Accenture on the Spanish channel of this podcast. But since then, there's been more surveys and studies making it clear that CDP projects have largely been a disappointment for many, and I'm quite sure that this is due to the unrealistic expectations attached to them. So, the holy grail of a single customer view, as if the human brain was entirely predictable on the back of a few clicks. But we're taking today a leap forward into the future, or maybe the present already, by looking at the idea of the composable CDP, what I believe is the substitute for the CDPs born between 2014, 2016, more or less. And this means that we're now looking at greater network centricity, so more aligned with privacy by design principles, but also at less redundancies at data storage level, since unlike the first wave of CDPs, these new tools are sitting on top of existing data warehouses like Databricks or Snowflake, rather than building an entire separate copy of all customer records with alternative and maybe incompatible data retention policies and so on. So it seems much more efficient. Nobody's paying me to say this, of course, important. I'm not promoting anybody. But we've brought Tejas Manohar, because they were kind enough to accept the invitation, and to talk about this. And he's the co-founder and co-CEO of Hightouch, which is a well-known, first it was well-known as a reverse ETL, or extract, transform, load layer, as many in that industry, in the MarTech industry, know, as a provider for that reverse ETL service, but now as a composable CDP. Prior to Hightouch, Tejas was an early engineer at Segment, which is also a well-known, I'd say, first-generation customer data platform, or CDP, that is now part of Twilio. So, let's take a look at how this key piece in the marketing data stack affects everything else, including privacy compliance, of course. Tejas, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Many people are very curious. What's a composable CDP? And I'm sorry you have to repeat yourself. I know you do this a lot, but what is a composable CDP?
No, it's a totally great question. So if you think about the world of marketing these days, a lot of the marketer's job has really started to become data oriented, right? If you receive an email in your inbox, that means a company probably used some data they have about you to say we should reach out to this person. In the content of that email, they're actually suggesting you to, I don't know, buy a specific product, look at a specific event, see some personalized content, hopefully, if it's a good email. That's ideally driven by data in a best-in-class, high-performing marketing team. The time that you send the communications, the channel you use, the particular price or the offer, all these things in marketing are starting to become more and more data-driven. And what we're finding is that marketing teams are just longing for a strong data platform for them to be able to operate out of, to do things like, just understand their customers better, build audiences, see how many customers are in group X that is high value or group Y that's low value by mixing and matching different criteria, being able to use this data, so activate this data and personalize things across all different channels and systems, advertising, CRM, email, you name it, that marketing teams are using in their stack. And I think that number of systems is only going up. And finally, a data platform that can help them analyze how the activities they're doing are actually driving performance and business benefit. Are they? Are they not? Should they double down? Should they rearrange their budget allocation? And the typical answer for all of a marketing team's data problems over the last decade has started to become this idea of a CDP. It's the whole buzzword in the marketing technology space. You can probably name any data problem to many CMOs or marketing leaders, and a CDP is the answer. And I know this really intimately as well. Before founding Hightouch, which is a company in the composable CDP space, it's a term that you asked me about and we pioneered. I was an early engineering and product leader at Segment, which was one of the original and leading traditional CDP companies. I joined before that term really was a thing. And what we found is that CDP is a great idea. It says, hey, we'll give you this all-in-one platform that says put all your data into this all-in-one platform that's just built for marketing, and you don't have to deal with IT or engineering or technology or any of that. And we'll do everything that you want to do with regards to your data in one platform. The reality is, like, while it might be easy to buy one of these CDP platforms and stand it up for a simple Shopify store, when you're talking about some of the world's leading enterprises like a PetSmart or NBA or Warner or something like that, it's difficult to actually get all your data into some sort of off-the-shelf system, whether that's a CRM like Salesforce or a CDP like Segment or Action IQ from Particle or any of those terms. And then B, a lot of the CDP solutions, just like any SaaS platform, aren't flexible enough to really handle all your data needs and understand everything about the customer, right? They're good for tracking events off your websites or page visits or added to the cart, checked out. What about really the full life cycle of your customer and marketing? So what we've been finding is that the golden answer to all things data in the enterprise has started to become the data clouds and data warehouses. Platforms like Snowflake, Databricks, Google Cloud, AWS, Azure. I can't name an enterprise that really cares about data, especially cares about data for marketing, that's not investing in one of these. So the idea behind a composable CDP is, bringing that to marketing and allowing you to have a marketing platform that sits directly on the data warehouse that, turns it into a platform that marketers can use to activate data, to personalize, to build audiences, to do all the marketing things in an easy way and solve any missing gaps you have in the data warehouse along the way, like real-time functionality or getting any missing data in there, or collecting web events or any of that kind of jazz.
Could we say that you're embracing the evolution of database technology and data warehouses in a way that simply wasn't possible before? So when Segment was there and in the early days of what we're now trying, or I am calling first gen CDPs, so tag management platforms evolving because they could collect events and unstructured data and timestamp based data where everything was built around structured data. So back then, if anyone could do that, just record events and somehow map event, again, timestamp based data to structured data, that was new. And we were coming from MongoDB and, NoSQL and all of that evolution. And so is it correct to say, you tell me, that because warehouses now are much more powerful, we do not need to go elsewhere for that ability to ingest all sorts of data, and therefore it makes sense to simply leverage what they can do, or is there any other reason besides everything you're saying, which is centralizing their capabilities and your efforts to have it all in one place?
Yeah, really great question. So I think it's a couple things. First, just as you mentioned, I used to work in the CDP space, so I have a bias here too. But I don't think the way CDPs were built was stupid or dumb or anything like that. There's a lot of X versus Y, high touch versus segment versus and particle in the space. But the reason why things were built this way before, when you look at the segments and in particles and teliums and treasury data and action IQs, it made sense. In 2016 or 2017, if you were to go to a large enterprise and say, hey, I want to build your CDP on top of the data warehouse, most of the enterprises would say on top of Teradata or my 5 data warehouses that or the SQL server over here, or you mean that process that I ask a data analyst to get me something and they send it to me 2 weeks later because they need to run a nightly job? And that was the state of data warehousing back then. And while, companies like Snowflake, sure, they existed in 2016, they only had about 100 customers. The adoption of these technologies was rather new. And the technology that almost every company has today, even if you're, I don't want to say a not tech advanced company, but even if you're a typical retailer, let's say, that really just cares about data and marketing, like a PetSmart, the technology that those companies have today is technology that only Google and Facebook and Microsoft and companies like that had about a decade ago. So yes, the technology landscape has certainly changed, but I think what's more important to think about is the adoption and the democratization of that technology, right? Every kind of Fortune 500 or Global 2000 or even fast growing startup is adopting a cloud data warehouse now if they're serious about data by any means. Yeah. The second thing though I would mention is that the adoption of that technology means it's just going to be easier if we can stand a composable CDP on top of an existing data warehouse that your company's already working towards, or even if the data warehouse is not fully ready but has some valuable data, let's start getting that in the hands of the marketers, and let's get a platform like Hightouch that can not just allow you to activate that data, but can fill in some of the gaps along the way, like help you collect events into your warehouse in real time, which is really useful, or do identity resolution or do other functionality. And the last thing I would say is that it's also not just about what solves the most immediate problem for marketing, but what solves the future problem, right? If marketing is really becoming a data problem, who to send communications to, when to send them, what the right thing to send, how do I send my different first party signals to ad networks so they can properly optimize my campaigns. If marketing is becoming a data discipline, then marketers should have the best data platform, especially as things like AI and machine learning become more important in business. And the data warehouse is the place where that stuff happens.
You've said something earlier, which is that the answer to every problem now is the CDP, right? And we're always looking for a holy grail and for these customer 360. And the one thing I can see persists is the dream that you can make marketing predictable and that marketing really is just a data problem, as you could probably see,
And it's
right?
not totally, that's fair too.
It's a human, right, elements, so this emotional elements that when we try to tackle marketing from a technical perspective, trying to tell marketers, which come from the humanistic side of things, how to do their job. And I think there's a misalignment there. So, building on this, as you were saying, it makes all the sense that this third generation, if I can call that CDP, were those that were born in 2014, 2016, they would tell us that a composable CDP or yourselves are sacrificing much of the value of a CDP because they see that a lot of the work they do is help you normalize and help you build that coherent view of the data. What would you say to that?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. So first thing I wanted to say is that uh, to say that the problem of CDP is as simple as just activating data or moving it to a marketing system like a Facebook ads or Google or Salesforce or something like that is wrong, right? The problem of CDPs is much more vast than that. It comes down to how do you get the right data in the right platform in the first place? How do you build a centralized view of the customer? How do you activate it? But also how do you analyze like what's actually working in your campaigns? It's full cycle. And I think the last part is actually an area which we can talk about later, where the composable approach and the data warehouse really shines because marketing analytics is always using the data warehouse in BI now, not using Adobe Analytics and GA as the source of truth. So first and foremost, I just want to say that I agree with all traditional CDP vendors that the problem of customer data is vast and that, purely functionality around reverse ETL or activation is not just, saying that that's not the whole solution to the CDP pain point or the pain points associated with CDPs that all companies are looking for. For some companies, it is. They're so mature on the tech side that all they need is that. For other companies, they need a little bit more help. And we acknowledge that, right? When we entered the space uh, about 4 or 5 years ago, we came out with marketing that said, hey, we think the CDP is going to be replaced by the data warehouse and what's happening in Snowflake and Databricks and stuff like that over time. And that we were going to help out with that transition because we believe it's so valuable for marketers to be able to rely on the source of truth that exists across the business. And we're seeing all these pains with the traditional CDP model. Gartner says that about half of the implementations don't provide any value in the enterprise, and people still spend hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars on them. Forrester says that 90% of CDP users on the marketing team aren't satisfied with, what they're getting from the CDP once they stand it up. So we see that dissatisfaction, and we think that this movement towards giving marketing an amazing data platform that the rest of the business is using as well, and really having a central system across the company instead of just another data silo in a CDP is going to be monumental. But all we helped with when we first launched Hightouch was, and correctly was, just activating data from the warehouse. That was the first problem we found. We allowed customers to activate data from the warehouse by syncing it from something like Snowflake to Salesforce or Facebook ads or Marketo or Braze to run personalized campaigns and to target customers better and all of that stuff. We also allowed them to do things like build audiences and do that in a self-service way, but it's very activation focused. Since then, I think CDPs keep saying the same thing, which is if you need help getting your data in order, you need a traditional CDP. But the landscape has evolved, right? If you look at Hightouch's product catalog today, we have an event collection product that allows you to collect events just like a CDP into the data warehouse in real time so that you can use it for anything in your business, including marketing personalization. And it just works out of the box in our audience builder, but can also be viewed in something like Tableau or any other process that's going on in your business. So you're really looking at one central record. We also have functionality around things like identity resolution. I found that with the largest CDP customers, they often find the identity resolution in a customer data platform to be a bit rigid, right? If you look at the docs, I encourage all CDP buyers to really look into the documentation and really dig in with the solutions teams of their vendors and run POCs with actual live use cases to figure out how this stuff works in practice. Because I think that's often where it breaks down, not the promises. But if you look into the docs of something like Segment, the identity product is so straightforward, right? Segment knows how to resolve identities on top of data that's collected by Segment. Sure, anyone knows how to do that. Amplitude can do that too. But if you really want to solve the customer 360 problem, you need to have a framework that's flexible enough to do that off various different data in your data warehouse, like data from your point of sale systems or data from different places. And frankly, like that's a challenge that we solve at Hightouch through a more flexible identity product, plus saying that not everything in the world can be solved out of the box, and you need data people at your company to help dig through this stuff. Or I think interestingly, some companies like Imperity and specifically, I don't really consider them a CDP, but they've started to tackle that, with machine learning and stuff like that, which I think is also compelling and interesting. Even though it's a different approach than what we've taken Hightouch, and we see some companies use both together. So yeah, I would just say that I think that a lot of the messaging, I think CDPs are realizing that the composable approach is taking off. This data warehousing is inevitable, and it's changing the world of marketing, right? I mean, marketers are going from using Adobe Analytics, Google Analytics, spreadsheets as their main place of data to using Tableau, Looker, the data warehouse, et cetera, as their main place of data. And that this trend is inevitable. And um, they're just kind of saying that other vendors are missing functionality when that's not really the reality anymore. So that's my perspective.
Something I see is that some of these more traditional CDPs are in fact accepting the change, and some of them are
Yeah,
already sort
that's
of
true.
embracing that idea and say, actually, we can sit on top of Snowflake and Databricks, we can do it as well. And therefore, then basically saying the value is in activation. If we move into then activation, something that is happening is that identity is not stealthy anymore, it's more transparent. Identity resolution used to happen behind the curtains. And it was all about how much you can put together.
Yeah, with third-party cookies or DMPs, stuff like that.
Yeah, or fingerprinting, whatever you can do without people being aware that they're being deduplicated. That's sort of going away slowly, and we're opening the door to more transparency. And something that I see, and I believe it's an advantage. I want to see what you think. I think by having data in a single place, there's a key piece that every buyer is looking for now, which is data subject access requests support. Do you see anything coming your way in that regard?
So the answer is yes. I think the number one thing most marketing teams care about is things like how do you deliver the best experience to customers? How do I actually optimize the KPIs I care about, whether those are customer acquisition, customer retention, engagement, average customer value. But one of our big value drivers as a company, on top of helping with those jobs to be done for marketers, is just delivering a more compliant customer data stack and helping companies be compliant when it comes to customer data. Because to the dismay of capitalism, it's become a lot harder to use customer data today and to do all the things I just mentioned with optimizing your marketing campaigns and um, personalizing and improving your metrics and being more data driven just broadly, right? Just being more data driven is more difficult than it was, and it's getting more and more difficult each year. So yes, that's something that we definitely hear about in almost every enterprise sales conversation. And it takes a lot of different flavors, right? Um, there's what are the actual mechanisms that you offer in your tool to, differentiate who sees what types of customer data and what types of actions they have on it. There's how do you stay compliant with regulations, like both local regulations in states like California with regards to user privacy, or global regulations for global companies that we work with that have to deal with GDPR and the versions of that in Australia and India and Japan and different countries. And then there's also just kind of the security and just governance aspect of it as well, and making sure that new systems aren't going to create new hassles. So I would say uh, there's no like one answer I can give on like, the solution for compliance, of course, and you know that. But there are a few things that I would say that have been really powerful in my experience. One is just owning your data as a company. I think we can all agree, anyone who has a background in compliance or just has had to deal with this from the marketing side, that more copies of the data, especially more copies of the data that need to exist forever and will live with other companies that are out of your control, like a CDP, uh, make it very difficult to know if you're compliant and to handle things from a compliance perspective. The other thing I would say is, working with vendors that can operate their servers across a variety of different regions is very, very beneficial. And the last thing I would say is that um, to really be compliant from a customer data perspective, being able to have a central hub of which all data flows through and flows out of is really, really helpful. And those are three principles that we've really thought about from a product from the beginning. And tackling those in order are one, unlike CDPs, we don't store your customer data. We actually leave that all on your data platform. We've even built this interesting like hybrid architecture where Hightouch is an easy to use SaaS tool, visual for marketers, very easy to use platform. You just go to the website and log in. But all the data is actually stored in your data warehouse, like Snowflake or Databricks or Google Cloud or whatever it is. And you might be wondering, like, how is that fast? Isn't the app slow and stuff like that? Well, no, there's a lot of optimizations you can do these days, and these warehouses have really changed from what they were 10 years ago, or even 5 or 3 years ago. But in addition to that, we've built this cool like caching layer that can actually sit inside of the customer's cloud and serve Hightouch. So we still don't need to, read data, even if we need to pull something up in like less than a second or even milliseconds for personalization. And so that's the first one. We just don't store your data, so it's less copies. And it's a CDP platform needs to store the data for a long time. A lot of them talk about these retention policies, or maybe they even charge you more if you want to access data from 2 years ago, et cetera. If you own data, you just don't have these problems on the pricing side, on the compliance side, on the personalization side. The second one I mentioned, I think, was just a variety of different regulation that's coming up. And having like a hub and spoke is really helpful for this. So from the beginning of Hightouch, even back when we were not kind of a full-fledged, complete composable CDP, but when we were in reverse ETL, every single integration of Hightouch, every activation point, whether it's an ad network or a CRM or a marketing tool, supports deleting data. So you can configure it and you can just say when data, drops, when a user is removed from a certain audience or disappears from your data warehouse, what do you do with it? And the default is that you can actually propagate that to delete it from the downstream systems, completely configurable. And that makes it really easy. And if you have a central place, the more you put in Hightouch, the easier it is to be compliant. Easier it is to know you're compliant. And then the last thing I would say is just the flexibility of the platform, right? So, um, you know, being able, I think a lot of CDPs are trying to keep up with the privacy regulation and support every single rule and all these really custom things. And that's difficult to do. So we've really also, in addition, focused to just giving customers a high level of flexibility where you can go in and define custom opt-out rules in something like SQL, or using our powerful layer that allows you to configure exactly what data is being shown to marketers and how it can be used, versus trying to have a more out of the box solution that might be out of the box but wrong and prevent marketers from actually self-serving data because they're scared of these issues or because their compliance team is scared and it'll prevent them from using that.
What do you think of data clean rooms? Do you see them competing with you? Do you see any promise in that space? What's your view?
So I'm excited about data clean rooms as a concept. I think uh, data collaboration has been hard for a long time. If I'm Sony, and then I have PlayStation, and then on the other hand, I'm Activision making a game, and I want to run a marketing campaign to all the PlayStation customers who might be interested in this game. Doing something like that just makes a lot of business sense and can make a lot of business sense for both parties involved, actually. Maybe one of them can make marketplace store percentage revenue off that. The other one can make game revenue off that. And collaborating on it makes a ton of sense, but no one wants to collaborate in a way where you have to send all your data over to a company that, I don't know, might turn around and be a competitor the next day, even if they're a partner today. So data clean rooms solve a big problem by allowing two companies to collaborate on their data, run analytics on it. Plus, you can connect any data clean room to Hightouch and start activating that data as well. Super easy, especially if it's one of the InfoSums or Habus or Samuas that are warehouse and cloud native, which I see is the direction of the data clean room space. And then activate that to do things like the marketing campaign I just mentioned between a game console and a game publisher. So I'm really excited about them, but I don't want to overpromise here because I think the adoption we've seen in the data clean room space has been a bit underwhelming so far. I think there's a lot of talk about data clean rooms, but it's not something a majority of our customers, even some of the greatest companies when it comes to using data towards marketing that we work with, are actually doing in practice. And I think one of the big hurdles for that is still just like the privacy, legal, compliance side, paperwork side, the actual partnerships between these companies, sensitivities around that. So I'm very excited about it. I think it's a big unlock from a tech perspective. But there's still a lot of other perspectives that make data collaboration difficult. My belief, and I could totally be wrong about this, we're not pursuing building a data clean room here at Hightouch at this time. We're more partnering with data clean rooms, but my belief is more so that like data clean rooms will become similar to data warehouses, and likely a part of data warehouses and data clouds. Like Google will offer one, AWS will offer one, Snowflake will offer one, etc. And they already do offer these, but they're just independent vendors that might be a little bit ahead of the curve right now. And I think that's validated by, recently Snowflake made an
They bought
acquisition of
one. Yeah.
Samua, which was one of the right, one of the bigger providers in the space, not as big as the Habus and InfoSums, but was doing some really interesting stuff from a technology perspective. And I know working with some pretty large banks and customers from the actual acquisition announcement. So I think we are really bullish on the data clouds, or just in some way or another, just like how data clouds are available to us when we go to a customer, they have a Snowflake or they have an Azure or whatever it is. Data clean rooms are available to us as well. And they're sort of like, the Pacific Gas and Electric, the PG&E of the data space, where they're just a utility and you expect to be able to connect to them and use them. Like I can use electricity in my house. And on top of that, we'll build the marketing workflows, the business workflows, the capabilities to help you use that to actually understand your customers on the analytics side and activate your customer data on the activation side.
It makes sense. Tejas, thank you very much. Very useful.
Cool. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Okay, that's all for today. Please help us gain some visibility and grow in every sense of the word by hitting 5 stars on whichever podcast player you use if you think we deserve them. And remember that you will find some episode notes and links to our social channels on mastersofprivacy.com. Thank you for listening.